Tonight, the Albanese government is eyeing off yet another law to let workers slack off, this time the right to work from home.
You know what? We will not have anybody working the way that we're going.
I'll also talk to a truck driver now standing for election in a one-man war against woke. Also tonight, the crime crisis that is now a political problem in 3 states, with even a federal Labor politician demanding we stop treating youth criminals like little angels. And what a time for the New South Wales government to crack down on people living in caravans when so many Australians can't afford a house. I'll talk to one of the people it's threatening. So much tonight. I mean, Barnaby Joyce, Patrick Christie's, and my whiskey of the week. By a woman this time. But this whiskey of hers is more like man's work. Am I allowed to say that? Well, but first, it's like that movie Groundhog Day, you know. Here comes Labor, here comes the ABC, totally forgetting that some terrorists came to the last lot of asylum seekers that they demanded we let in. Memory wipe. As I said on Monday, the Albanese government has quietly handed out more than 2,000 visas to Palestinians since the October 7th slaughter of 1,200 Jews by Hamas terrorists. More than 2,000 visas, travel visas, temporary protection ones, most to Palestinians in Gaza, which has been run for nearly 2 decades by Hamas, an Islamist terrorist group that's banned here. Now, not surprisingly, the opposition is asking the right questions. I mean, here we are giving visas to people who've lived in a terrorist regime and giving them only after just a day, sometimes only a few hours, to check them out.
We don't know about the authenticity of the travel documents. We don't know whether these people are Hamas sympathisers. And I think the government needs to tread very cautiously here. But
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese seems shocked by this meanness in asking these questions.
He's just wrong. And you know what he does every day, you see it. It's just fear campaigns every day that don't have a basis in what is going on.
No basis? And the ABC, same deal, just like it did with the last Labor government. This is ABC radio host Patricia Karvelis this morning, protesting to Liberal frontbencher James Patterson as if it's so mean to quibble over throwing visas at Palestinians from territories run by Islamic terrorists.
But there is no evidence that any of them are dangerous, is there? But are you talking about people being active, actual potential terrorists in this country, or their political ideology? But that would be a new benchmark, wouldn't it, James Patterson, that we are interrogating people's political views?
Now, even if we hadn't gone through all this farce before and had Australians actually die, these attacks on the Liberals would seem willfully stupid. But we have gone through this before. And I wonder, has the Albanese government really forgotten? It shouldn't have. I mean, after all, Albanese was actually a minister under Labor Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, his big mate, when Rudd let in the first of the 50,000 illegal boat people to sail here under Labor, and took in thousands more so-called refugees as well. And Rudd went nuts back then when one Liberal MP, Wilson Tuckey, also dared to say, but these boats, what about the security risk from the people in them? Tuckey said, if you wanted to get into Australia and you have bad intentions, what do? You insert yourself in a crowd of 100, for which there is a great sympathy for the other 99. Well, Rudd hit the roof, said these were deeply divisive, disgusting remarks, and Tuckey should be thrown out of the Liberal Party. And the ABC whacked Tuckey as well. Except Tuckey turned out to be right. The vast majority of refugees we bring in, of course, they are not terrorists. But, bringing in people from poor, war-torn and tribal countries can go wrong. And didn't we find that out in the worst way? Because some refugees we took in, some as children, did indeed become terrorists or have terrorist links. They include Man Monis, an Iranian refugee who staged the deadly Lint cafe siege in 2014. There was Numan Haider, an Afghan refugee and Islamic State recruit who stabbed 2 police, and Fahad Jabbar, an Iranian refugee who killed police accountant Curtis Cheng while shouting Allah is the greatest, and Muhammad Ali Barialai, an Afghan refugee who became a recruiter and fighter for the Islamic State, and Somali-born refugee Yaqub Khaira, who murdered a worker in Melbourne, held a woman hostage and shot 3 police, saying, "This is for the Islamic State. This is for Al-Qaeda." And I could list more. Other refugees from the Middle East who also joined Islamist terrorist groups or bikie gangs. How could Albanese or the ABC forget this recent history and now risk repeating it? I mean, Patricia Cavellas today, "Oh yeah, but can't we trust the security agencies, to protect us?" Labor, "All our people are doing security checks." Oh, don't worry. And again, I say, check that recent past. The former head of ASIO, top security agency, former top army man himself, top diplomat, he was also saying, how could we be so suspicious of poor refugees?
I have absolutely no evidence to suggest there's a connection between refugees and terrorism.
After I pointed out back then, well, look, actually, some refugees had indeed turned to Islamist terrorism. He said, oh, no. What he actually meant, the risk factor wasn't that they were refugees, it was that they followed an extreme version of Islam. But then he realised, oh, that's not a very woke thing to say, so he changed his line again. Well, there wasn't really a link even to Islam. I don't buy the notion, he said, that the issue of Islamic extremism is in some way fostered or supported by the Muslim religion. In fact, I think it's blasphemous to the extent that I can comment on someone else's religion. I mean, wow, blasphemy. And then this former ASIO boss really put his foot in it, or actually put his finger on the problem that he was dancing around.
There are more than 500,000 Australian Muslims. 0.1% are the subject of security interest.
Let me do the maths. There are now more than 800,000 Muslims here. 0.1% of 800,000 works out to 800. 800 who could be the subject of security interest at that ratio that ASIO boss gave 6 years ago. 800 potential terrorists here. That actually strikes me as a lot. So can we just stop this phony outrage today? I mean, absolutely. Most refugees from war-torn Muslim countries are not a security risk. Absolutely. Let us not demonise the innocent. But equally, let us not pretend there's no risk, or that we can simply trust our security agencies to spot it and stop it. So yes, I would like the government to explain exactly who it's bringing in from Gaza, and how it can be so sure so quickly they're no danger at all. Don't give us more moral lectures, Prime Minister. Just give us the answers. And to another ridiculous debate today, the Albanese government just passed, the right to disconnect law to stop bosses hassling workers at home with calls and emails. And now it's like, perfect match. It's backing a review by Fair Work on the right to work from home as well.
I think what we need to do is to look for win-win. We need to look where it's appropriate.
Flexibility is fine for workers, and we encourage that. But in the end, we have to be careful that the Albanese government just doesn't side with the union on every occasion, because all that happens is if the price of wages go up too dramatically in an inflationary environment, you'll end up with much higher prices for consumers.
Strip this back. I mean, I think Dutton's got a point there. But what is the point of Fair Work or the government getting involved in this right to work from home issue? If having workers work from home is good for a business, businesses would let that happen. They do that now. In fact, they already do. But why even think of giving Fair Work, which is a government sort of body, the power to force other businesses to do the same if they think their workers will actually goof off instead, or just be less productive, not sparking off each other in the office? This is yet another so-called reform, like all the others from this union-funded government, that makes it harder on bosses and much easier for slackers, easier for the government's public servants especially.
Oh, you know what? We will not have anybody working the way that we're going. I think that I think it's great for those that are privileged enough to maybe work in an office to say, I work from home. I just don't get it. The right to disconnect, the right to work from home. Honestly, I mean, where is the productivity then?
Joining me from Danglemar is the Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, great to see you again. The right to work from home. Now, I love working from home, but in which way is that a right?
Well, it goes down to the person who pays the wages and how they see their rights. Because if the person who pays the wages believes it's a breach of their rights and their capacity to run a profitable business to actually make the money so you can pay the wages, then it's a nil-sum game. For some, yeah, of course they can work from home and their employer's quite happy for them to do it, and that's something they work out between themselves. But for others, to be quite frank, it's homeschooling without the parents. And, you know, that doesn't work. And then you enter into a dispute with a person from home saying, look, I've got this funny feeling that you're doing the washing, doing the gardening, you know, maybe having a look around the house and fixing up a few odds and ends and coming back and doing a bit of work and then going off again. But I don't quite know. But I'm feeling like you might be ripping me off. And how do we fix that dispute? How do we fix the whole purpose of what an office is for, so that you arrive, you go to work, there's outcomes, negotiated, problems are solved, and then you go home. This is yet another impost by government saying we won't let the employer determine how their business is going to run. We're going to say to the employee, you have a free run at it, and well-meaning doesn't work.
It also cuts this working from home business. Like I say, I love it, but for a lot of employers, it's a real challenge. I mean, they don't know exactly how long each job they give an employee will take. And if the employee's at work, they look up, the employee's finished, they're sitting back, they're having coffee. Oh, I can give them another job instead of ring at home. Have you finished? Oh, no, I'm snowed under. So, you know, it's just pathetic. But anyway, Barnaby, another issue. Yep. You've been a surprisingly soft touch at times on refugees. And the government now, though, issuing more than 2,000 visas to Palestinians, most from Gaza, and so very quickly. Does that raise alarm bells even with you?
Yes. I remember years ago, right back at I think it must have been about 2008, because I had a discussion with one of my colleagues. After coming back from Christmas Island, I said, look, there's a big difference between a refugee and an economic migrant. And we've got a lot of economic migrants, people who are coming to Australia, not so much because they're pushed out of their own country, but because, and I understand it, they see great economic opportunities to arrive here and they work their way around the system to do it. Now, no matter how you come here, there's one thing that's absolutely written in stone, is you must have the capacity to add to our society and not detract from it. You must be a person who does not appear on the crime pages, but becomes an industrious person that adds to the wealth of this nation and to the civic responsibilities of this nation. Now, if you're not doing the proper checks, you've got no idea who's coming in here. And that is a real concern. And of course, the issue here is it looks like hundreds and hundreds of visas given to people from the Gaza Strip. Now, I've got no doubts they're genuine refugees, not one doubt in the world. But even then, we have a responsibility to clearly understand who is coming into our nation. Otherwise, you are buying a problem. And when problems occur, it makes it even harder in the future to deal with genuine refugees, because the Australian people swing against it.
And of course, a lot of Jews are rightly worried with the level of anti-Semitism already here. With so much Jew hatred in that part of the world, look, some of these people might love Jews like their neighbours. I'm not so sure. I think we've got enough of this anti-Semitism here to avoid. We should be avoiding it. I see Opposition Leader Peter Dutton was campaigning against it.
It's running right. Anti-Semitism is running right, and you're seeing a lot of the people.
It's disgusting.
To be honest, it's the strangest thing I've seen in Australia. You've got basically the left wing, who always sort of, they're wondrous and they, gender fluidity and pro-environmentalism, and anti-Semitism. And all of a sudden, it's come out. it's come out. You know, and this is what happens if you cuddle up to the crocodile. One day it eats you. Remember, they weren't benevolent forces. It all, in the end, this all comes unstuck, and you're seeing that. And I hope, you know, our nation moves away from it. And I hope to many others, it's a clarion call. Be careful who you're cuddling up to.
Absolutely, Barnaby. And later in the show, I'll give you the viewers another disgusting example of anti-Semitism. Well, I think it's anti-Semitism. The guy responsible says it's not. It's just anti-Zionist, but I'll let viewers decide. Barnaby Joyce, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm with Barnaby. I do not understand what's going on. It's just incredible. This hatred in our streets is so medieval. Now, if it's not hard enough already for the poor and the young to find a home that they can afford to buy or even rent, have you seen what's happening to house prices? Have you seen the queues in New South Wales in particular outside, you know, flats, apartments going to rent? People, oh, please be me. At this very time, the New South Wales government is considering a new law it's drawn up to crack down on people using their caravan as a home on private property. Now, under this proposed law, you can't keep your caravan plugged into the power and the water on private properties for more than 6 months without getting your council to approve a development application. Same if this caravan or relocatable home, it applies to them too, is bigger than 20 square metres. And why? Why this sudden crackdown? Well, the New South Wales Planning Minister struggled to answer that on 2GB, making it sound like the government is just, I don't know, poking its nose into your business.
Because it's the call on services. It's also about making sure that we've got not mismatched and arbitrary restrictions in place, making sure that there's consistency between secondary dwellings and what requires a DA more generally and what might be a complying development certificate.
Oh, we can't have inconsistencies and mismatches. Oh no, we've got to have all those pencils lined up straight. Joining me is someone who will be hurt by this proposed law, Andre Hilliger. Andre, thank you so much for your time. How would this proposed law affect you and your wife?
Well, may I start by saying that there's 3 of us who live in a van home. It's like a little caravan. It's about 60 square. And the 3 of us is my wife, myself, and my wife's mother, who's at the moment 92 years old. We managed to use our pension fund just to buy a house, little house as it is there. That's all we could afford. We live on my son's property and we pay our way there. So basically the pension that we do get, we use for electricity, food, and all the other little bits and pieces that we have. How would it affect us if it all went through? It's really a difficult thing to say, because if we can't use the house, what do we do with the house? We'd then need to sell the house, and the house would then be, you'd have to have council approval for the house, which would then up the cost. And there's quite a few people, as myself, in this position where you can't really afford to go the extra mile, when especially there's 3 old people who are trying to do their own thing. Where would we go? Social housing? I don't think there's enough of that anyway. So we couldn't go to social housing. We could live in a tent. It would be very cold or hot. Whatever the case might be, it would not be comfortable. We would not have a toilet in there. We would not have a shower in there. So we'd then have to go to a campsite where they provide all that. And it's rather difficult to do that. Now, I must say, in our little street, I'm from Yass, in our little street in Yass, there are actually 4 people who have this type of housing behind the official house. 3 out of the 4 are people who are in my position, who wouldn't be able to afford to live anywhere else but in a little house like that.
Well, we appreciate, I know you feel strongly about this. You've driven all the way from Yass to our studio in Sydney to have your say on this. To be clear, you live in a relocatable home. It applies to them too. It's like a glorified caravan in a sense. But what about the reasons I've heard given for this potential crackdown, that your caravan or relocatable home or mobile home might be an eyesore maybe, or I know you might end up with too many people on one block of land, or what about services, planning, or the fire risk? What about all that?
Well, in my case, there's not much of that holds true, because we live in a 25-acre property. My son owns the property, so it's not an eyesore. You can't even see the van home from the street. That's how far down it is. It's not an eyesore at all, and it's actually quite a nice little home to look at. We've managed to put some veggie beds in and some gardens, so it all looks good. I don't know. Planning permission, does it really need planning permission? I think this is all, it all complicates the whole issue. And people in my position... Sorry?
No, and you know what it sounds like? It sounds like public servants trying to fix a problem that not many people are upset about, but they'll sure upset people when they get around to fixing it. Andrea Hilliger, look, thank you so much indeed for taking the time to come down and tell us about this, because I think this, unless there's a better explanation, the Planning Minister didn't give it, let us hear a better explanation for this crackdown. But otherwise, let us hope
I really don't know, because this little house that we live in is really well made, it's well produced, it lives by the standards for the caravan. I don't know what more we can do.
Well, long may you continue to live in it. Thank you so much indeed for your time. After the break, the truck driver who's decided to wage a one-man war on woke politics by running for election to his council. Now, we talked a couple of weeks ago about a survey by Council Watch that said ratepayers were sick of their councils going all woke. You know, crusading on global warming, or on The Voice last year, remember that? On gay pride. Some now on the war in Gaza, instead of just sticking to roads, rates and rubbish. In which case, if you are one of these many ratepayers and you live in Toowoomba, you might have been glad to see these signs popping up ahead of the election in 3 weeks' time. Elect Nathan Essex. Say no to woke. Now, the man on that poster joins me now. Nathan Essex, thanks for your time. Nathan Essex, thank you so much for your time. You want to be a councillor, but what's your job at the moment?
Currently, I am a long-distance interstate truck driver.
So you've had plenty of time to think about all sorts of things. What made you decide somewhere out on the road, maybe past Goulburn, not sure where, I want to get on the council?
Okay, I chose to be a councillor, Andrew, based on part of the things I use every day is roads and the infrastructure of our region, particularly within the Toowoomba region. It is in need of great repair, and the council needs to go back to basics. Toowoomba residents want a council that is focused on them. We are the largest inland rural city outside of Canberra, and we are sick and tired of this woke agenda being pushed. My platform is plain and simple, Andrew. Roads, rates and rubbish, and doing them well and consistently.
I think the roads is underlined on that manifesto, and why not? I mean, I can't believe some of the roads that I drove in the country Victoria the other day. It was like I was on a trampoline at one stage. I was dodging potholes left and right. It's just been unbelievable. But you mentioned the woke agenda. What's so woke about this council?
Andrew, our council, it is a very conservative region. We make up the federal electorate of Groom and partial the federal electorate of Maranoa. We do not want to embrace this woke agenda. The council wants to introduce e-scooters at the cost of rate. ratepayers, $115,000 for the initial startup, and then an extra $40,000 per year.
Renaming Tabletop Mountain, mate. How about that bit? I couldn't believe it. I saw someone called Uncle Fossey. Uncle Fossey, you know. He identifies as Aboriginal, Nathan, and he carried a spear in this picture, apparently so that viewers would know he's Aboriginal, and his push for Tabletop Mountain to be called Mirwa. The council's saying yes. I would bet you, mate, that the residents don't call Tabletop Mountain Mirwa, do they?
No, we do not. We've called it Tabletop Mountain. It's a very, very popular tourist place for the region. It's used for walking trails. Hikers use it every weekend, and we know it as Tabletop. And this is part of, you've just mentioned, this gentleman identifies as an Indigenous person, and it's part of the whole woke agenda, Andrew, that people are basing their life on feelings and emotions rather than common sense factual evidence.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. Are you feeling lucky, Nathan? Do you think you're going to win?
We are confident that our region, being a conservative region, that it will embrace my campaign, it will get on board, and we are going to reinstate, and we're going to preserve and protect. A part of saying no to woke is preserve and protect the freedoms and the freedoms of speech and the freedoms of movement that the residents of the Toowoomba region have now, before they slowly slip away through our fingertips.
But Nathan Essex, I know you must be getting your message through, because you've attracted heat from the usual agendas. I saw one journalist take a pot shot at you, etc., etc. Let a council take it from someone who's been through the fires, Nathan. If you're being criticised, you must be doing something right.
Exactly right, Andrew. Exactly right.
Mate, if you're getting the criticism, all strength to you and all the best. I think a lot of viewers will be having their fingers crossed for you. Good luck to you. I'm looking forward to seeing a forest of anti-woke candidates in all these council elections. It could be the new, they've got the teals on that side. You be the woke candidates on this. You can come on this show. We'll give you promotion. After the break, big trouble now with youth crime in 3 states. The figures, it's just amazing. And something astonishing, how government bushfire recovery funds are being used to fund a gay formal for children. I mentioned one example at the top of the show, but there's another kind of argument that people on the left also don't like, and again, because going into it makes you sound mean, not compassionate, and that's the most important thing, that you seem compassionate no matter what the real effects are of what you do. It's crime, especially youth crime. It's becoming a real issue, though, in several states. In Queensland, for instance, the police commissioner quit yesterday, as we told you, after a lot of criticisms of the explosion in crime there under her watch, particularly youth crime. And the figures don't lie. I've just seen the rate of assaults in Queensland jumped in 9 years from 588 assaults for every 100,000 people to 942. Unlawful entries went up even more, from 260 for every 100,000 people to 60 to 864. Those are extraordinary figures. Now, in the Northern Territory, especially Alice Springs, youth crime among Aboriginal youth is just terrible. Last week, 4 children as young as 10 in a stolen car. There's something so common there now, kids doing wheelies. I mean, 11-year-old behind a wheel in one. Police often just bringing them back to dysfunctional homes, like their parents will sort them out, so that even Federal Labor MP Marion Scrimgeour, who suffered a home invasion herself, has said, enough, we've got to stop thinking, she said, that we're dealing with little angels here. When you look at those photos, they're laughing and smiling, they think it's a joke, and it's not, because they could have an accident and one of them could get killed. We've got to stop pussyfooting around here and thinking that these kids are going and they're being taken home to a responsible adult, because in a lot of these cases there isn't a responsible adult there. And the reality is these kids don't listen. In fact, the reality is these kids don't get told at home how to behave. So what do? Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has even made crime in Victoria an issue in the by-election there, promising to get tough on youth crime, even though it's actually a state matter. So it is a big issue, even if a lot of people don't want to know it. Joining me, Sky News presenter James McPherson of The Late Debate here on Sky at 10 p.m. And Evelyn Ray, writer and Sky News contributor. James McPherson, how much of a problem is this really? I mean, you know, you always get this, it's a media beat-up, or it's a political opportunism, dog whistles, or is something really broken?
Well, I think we know something's really broken. I mean, even Marion Scrigmore, who, as you said, is a Labor MP, she's Indigenous, she knows it's real. Her own home has been broken into. This softly approach to youth crime doesn't work. But as a society, this is what we've decided to teach our kids, that there are no consequences. You talked about the fact there's no discipline in the home, there's no discipline in the school, and increasingly there's no discipline in the justice system either. And this idea that we should teach children that there are no consequences, that's not kind, that's cruel, because we all know eventually there are consequences, and so the earlier young people learn it, the better off they are, the better off all of us are. And so if you love your children, you discipline them. And so this reluctance to impose penalties on young people who break the law is not compassionate, it's not kind, it's actually a form of abuse, because it does them no favours, it doesn't teach them how to live a responsible life, and it doesn't prepare them for the future.
But Evelyn, you know, when you hear a politician say, you know, talk about more discipline needed, you know, there's something a little, whoa, you know. I remember when Peter Dutton was making an issue, a political issue, this some years ago, of the then an ethnic crime problem in Victoria, you know, saying people were too scared to go to restaurants at night, and some people were, others obviously weren't. He got monstered and got credited with breaking the Liberal brand there. So what can politicians do?
Yeah, it's a really tough one here, because a lot of the time if politicians speak out against these things, they speak out against their own ideologies. So for her to come out against it is a pretty big deal. It must be pretty bad, and she must have perhaps been pretty affected by the break-in that happened to her herself. But look, you know, I mean, how many break-ins are going to happen before people start listening? How many people are going to get hurt? How many children are going to get hurt? How many children's lives are going to get destroyed? These are the questions we should be asking. But the statistics speak for themselves. And the thing is, these are the things that we know of, you know, the crimes that are reported or detected, not the total sum of all youth crimes. And coming from a law enforcement background, I can tell you that it is likely double what we're actually seeing statistically, because so often crimes go unpunished, undetected, and unreported. So the youth crime, I think, is actually a lot worse than what we're actually seeing here with these statistics. But look, police can always do better. The justice system can always do better. But ideally, what needs to happen is exactly what James said. Parents need to do better. This is a family problem.
Yes,
this is a parental problem.
Yeah, but honestly, the tales I hear from people who actually work with damaged families and close to some, but it's horrific. You cannot fix rotten parents who, you know, you just can't. You can't. And so what do you do then? And I don't think the state has come to terms with that issue. Meanwhile, James, I tell you what, this Labor government has not come to terms with the anti-Semitism around. It keeps staggering me. It's getting more and more virulent. Now, I remember when Israel's war against the Hamas terrorist group started, that people were at least careful to say, oh no, I don't support Hamas. You know, I want this war to stop. I don't support Hamas. It's the innocent Palestinians I care about. But now I see Nicholas Poinder. He's a prominent lawyer. In fact, he was once the senior lawyer for the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. And he says, oh, he actually supports Hamas as the legitimate defender of Palestinians. He suggested they could be absolute heroes. And when an Israeli swimmer was booed at the World Aquatics Championships in Doha, he tweeted, good. No Israeli should ever feel comfortable outside their apartheid, genocidal pseudo-state. And that he's seen Israeli people there for what they really are. All of them, I suppose, racists and bigots. Now, James Pointer says it's not an anti-Semite, it's just an anti-Zionist. But what do you make of his hate and his support of Hamas?
I can't believe he's able to get away with it. I mean, I thought Hamas was a listed terror organisation. Hasn't the Albanese government declared, albeit they took a long time to do it, but they eventually got around to saying October 7 was a terror attack. So for anybody, let alone a member of the court, to publicly support Hamas and to applaud what they did, I mean, at the very least, he should be on a terror watch list, I would have thought. And he actually said no Israeli should feel safe outside of Israel. How is that not incitement to violence? Actually, he didn't say safe. He said no Jew should feel comfortable. But, I mean, it's the same thing, right? You say tomato, I say tomato. That surely goes very close to incitement. But what we've seen is that governments right around this country have pretty much turned a blind eye to anti-Semitism. And as you've pointed out, it's just gone from strength to where we now have people who you would call respectable openly declaring their support for Hamas.
I don't get it. He said no Israeli outside Israel should feel safe or should feel comfortable. And like I say, he says it's not anti-Semitic. I tell you what, being nicely anti-Semitic, how come so many Jews hearing this sort of thing feel so scared? He might make the connection there. But now this is odd. Evelyn, you brought this to my attention, and I thought, no, Evelyn, you've got this the wrong way round. But I had to dig. Really? By all means, yes, have a queer formal if that's what you want. I'm totally okay with that. That's wonderful. Have a good time. But this queer formal is part funded by the local council and by the Australian government using money from the Black Summer Bushfire Recovery Program. I'm happy to give my taxes to that. But bushfire money for a gay formal, I mean, how does that qualify?
Yeah, look, I'm in two minds with this because on one hand, I think it's atrocious that a council would get behind a drag queen hosted queer formal for children as young as 12. But on the other hand, this is now the new religion. This is the new state religion. And can you imagine the consequences if the council knocked back this request for funding? Because, you know, anyone who is rational, anyone who is logical, anyone who can think with reason knows that the money could be far better used elsewhere and for people who would likely use it for suffering after these particular bushfires. But the problem we have is that we're told that we have to deny logic, we have to deny reason, because if we don't conform to their dogmas, we are some kind of phobe of an ism and our life is over. Because let's face it, they do not just cancel you, they destroy you. And you can't convince me that if you spoke to any family or any person or any business who suffered from these bushfires, you can't convince me that they think this would be money well spent.
James, can you understand how the government, in setting up a Black Summer bushfire recovery program, envisaged it would be to actually fund things like this?
No, I don't think any sexualities were burned down in the bushfire. When you say bushfire recovery fund, I'm thinking repairing, destroyed infrastructure, maybe buying new firefighting equipment, perhaps providing counselling for people who suffered loss of home or loss of life. But a queer formal, that would immediately raise question marks in any thinking person who heard about it. That's not where you would expect that money to go.
I think someone's having a song. Someone's having a big giggle as they took the money out of that fund. Evelyn Ray, James McPherson, thank you both for your time. After the break, Britain tries to fire its most powerful weapon, a nuclear missile, as a test, right? Result is total embarrassment for a military too woke for war. Plus, Prince William decides to play politics with Israel, and my whiskey of the week, with a little announcement of my whereabouts next week. There's a bit of a woke theme going through this show because listen to this. The British military thought, well, the world's getting very dangerous. It's time we practice firing our super weapon, one of our nuclear missiles, as a test, not for real bomb. And now the last time they tried this was 12 years ago, right? And it worked. And they tried again 8 years ago, but it didn't. It failed. So I thought, ooh. So out went HMS Vanguard, a submarine, about 2 weeks ago, to try. We only just got out the news to try again. Let's have another test fire. It's been so long. How embarrassing. A second misfire, plop, like that. That's 2 failed firings in a row of Britain's ultimate weapon. And to make it worse, this news is broken at the same time as the army has allowed soldiers, men, identifying as women, to live in women-only accommodation. Joining me from London is Patrick Christie, star presenter on GB News. Patrick, you've been going to town on this. Britain seems to me to be in perfect shape to win the woke war, but not in shape to fight a world war.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Our missiles are impotent, Andrew, but I tell you what isn't, the blokes that we're putting in women's barracks at the moment. I mean, it is absolutely shocking. It's the second failure in a row. It cost us £17 million to plop this thing to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, the other big scandal is the fact that this leaked out as well. I mean, there's serious question marks as to how on earth this actually even managed to get into the press. That's not a good look, but it's the latest in a long line of actual military failures. So we've had aircraft carriers that couldn't make it onto NATO exercises. The government had to deny allegations that they'd refitted one aircraft carrier but accidentally programmed it to only go in reverse. We've had recruitment adverts for our armed forces that have included somebody pausing in a battlefield to do the call to prayer. We've had all sorts of this stuff. We've had the RAF having to pay people out in compensation because they internally said that they didn't want any more useless white male recruits and then held back men from passing their progress because they hadn't hit their diversity targets. So we are now genuinely putting diversity over national defence. It's absolutely remarkable. So yes, I'm sure Putin is quaking in his boots.
It's frightening. I didn't pick up on that issue. You're quite right. I mean, that the news got out that it hasn't been able to fire a successful nuclear missile for years now, 2 failures in a row. That would be damaging, but I don't know. Apparently they didn't learn from the last one, Patrick, so maybe it needed to get out to get a move on. But I tell you what, the one thing that hasn't come out here might be the crucial detail. Did they at least do the right thing and paint that failed missile in the rainbow colours?
Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. It was a rainbow-coloured missile, and that's exactly the right thing. So, and it couldn't have fired, you know, I mean, it would have been absolutely atrocious. So, yes, no, I believe as well that they are launching an urgent mission, spearheaded by Greta Thunberg, to pick this thing up off the bottom of the ocean, because we can't litter the bottom of the sea. We can't have plastics or indeed nuclear missiles anywhere near the bottom of the sea. The government, by the way, is trying to put an incredible spin on this, saying that this is actually a good thing, okay? Because what we've done now is we've learnt from our mistakes. And this missile, Andrew, it had to go through something like 119 different checks in order for us to press the button that was going to launch it. And all of those checks worked incredibly well. It just failed at the last moment. So we can all sleep easy. It turns out this is actually a good thing.
Well, the thing is, of course, it needed 120 checks. There's your problem right there. But, Patrick, you know, it's so weird. You know, Britain used to rule the waves. As you say, with the biggest NATO exercise in, I don't know what it was, 20 years or something, happening just a couple of weeks ago, starting a couple of weeks ago, you couldn't even get an aircraft carrier that was supposed to lead the charge out in the water because of this problem. I mean, this is starting to be really serious. Britain has always punched diplomatically well above its weight. It's a member of the UN Security Council still, one of the 5 permanent members. And it's a joke. It is a joke, like all this woke nonsense. I mean, isn't there a public outrage about it?
Yeah, the public is outraged because also we are spending billions and billions and billions of pounds and our government has decided to put a huge amount of stock in military nuclear deterrence, I should say, which is fine if it works, which the latest indication is that it doesn't, so there is that. The other aspect of this is that we're doing things like, you know, modern warfare, hybrid warfare, so it comes to things like drones, etc., etc. Now, that's fine, but actually, as we are seeing in Ukraine and with Russia, etc., you know, there is a place for conventional military defence, right? And Britain has always punched well above its weight. Britain has always been a plucky little nation. And frankly, if we've got a recruitment crisis and we're too focused on managing to try to entice people of a diverse background into our armed forces as opposed to actually manning the armed forces, pun intended, then we have got a massive problem.
Same problem right here, mate. Exactly the same problem. The demonisation of your past, the tribalising, the multiculturalising, all that kind of stuff. Who would risk their life to save a country that they're told is rotten. Meanwhile, it's symbolic, I think, that Prince William has got involved in politics and foreign affairs, calling for an end to Israel's war with the Hamas terrorist group, saying, well, too many have been killed. I, like so many others, want to see an end to the fighting as soon as possible. It's critical that aid gets in and the hostages are released. You might say, well, look, he's having a bet each way. Sounded a bit too much like a ceasefire, which is exactly what Hamas wants. But anyway, is giving advice like that his job?
Well, no, it's not his job. And a lot of people are saying, well, our future king has made his first mistake. I love Prince William, but it's not his first mistake. He's got into bed with the Green lobby as well. And he does seem to be getting involved with some causes that people think are not really his place. It also had absolutely zero effect, OK? Because despite his intervention, last night in Parliament, all three major political parties decided to vote like the People's Front of Judea on a very slightly different version of a ceasefire. In the end, everyone walked out. We didn't get a vote on anything. Meanwhile, we had a baying mob outside. I spoke to one of them. He's absolutely convinced that October the 7th was some kind of weird Zionist conspiracy theory. So you've got a baying mob out there now dictating what goes on in our House of Commons, because one of the reasons why MPs didn't vote was because apparently they're too afraid for their own safety. So I'm sorry, but they've now created a complete mess where they've allowed a load of people into our society that frankly hate us. And now their safety means that, oh, we couldn't possibly vote on this, we're too scared. Meanwhile, plebs like you and I, we just have to live in this mess at the moment. So Prince William's intervention achieved absolutely naff all, and frankly, neither did any of our politicians.
Well, I've actually seen some of the pro-Palestinian protesters, a mob, a couple of your senior Labor MPs, even the Labor ones. It is intimidating, but as you say, this is the consequence of earlier decisions. Patrick Christie's, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Well, I got an announcement. Next week I'm going to take a week off. I thought I'd go somewhere interesting for a holiday, Israel. I'm going to Israel. And as part of this, I decided to read up on a few things, and I've got to recommend for you, this is my book of the week, this one. The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream has Obstructed the Path to Peace. Now, it's actually written by two left-wingers, left-wing Israelis. One is a writer, one is a former Labor politician. And this book really shows you the madness of what we're supposed to treat as, that's quite a reasonable demand. From the start, returning people, refugees. You know how these Palestinian refugees have been in these refugee camps that look like cities. It's just terrible. For 75 years, and they're supposed to return to Israel. Returning people whose leaders have said from the start, from the very first year, they wanted the people returned to destroy Israel from within. Right? That's what it's about. And you think, have a think. This book is great. 750,000 Palestinians fled Israel at the time of the war, took off, didn't want to be part of it. What of the 1.2 million Greeks who were thrown out of Turkey after the end of their war 100 years ago? What of the 12 million Germans who were thrown out of Eastern Europe after World War II? Or what of the 14 million Pakistanis and Indians who had to flee when India was partitioned also 75, 77 years ago? Where are the demands that they be allowed back? Why is there no UN agency for them, still paying them Western aid? Why only for the Palestinians 75 years later? A UN agency, UNRWA, feeding this idea that Israel really is theirs. They will be able to go back. They deserve all this money. They don't have to assimilate it to where they are. And breeding this grievance has now exploded again. I tell you what, this is a Western-created, UN-funded disaster, and Israel is fighting that alone. The War of Return. As always, go to my page of recommendations on the Robinson Bookshop website. They are loving your custom. I heard from them today. Whiskey of the Week. One that's actually made by a woman, Desiree Reed. I'm sorry, Desiree, how I pronounce your name. In New Zealand. Cardrona Distillery. This one, made in bourbon and sherry vats. It's got a big sherry bomb, but it's nothing feminine about it. 63%. But what I really like about it, it's still got lovely flavour, but very good. Recommended. That's it from me. Now is Sharry Marks. And Sharry, great to see you. Look, I've spoken on the show tonight about the More than 2,000 Palestinians have been granted visas in as little as an hour to come here. And I was thinking, well, I hope they're sure of what they're doing here, but you might have a little insight into maybe they don't know what they're doing.